Right, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:01. We do have a quorum despite being short a few people. So first things first, our minute taker's here. Vicky, Mike is not here tonight, so we'll do our best to do time. If anyone notices we're going way over on a topic, just let me know. Our first action is public comment. I'll open the floor to public comment.
Hi, everyone. Shauna from Bristol. I'll make it short and sweet. I appreciate your response, Patrick. I did request that I believe that the monitoring reports for treatment of students, as well as the monitoring report for treatment of staff, I believe both should be rescinded due to incomplete information. I feel like there needs to be more evidence. I don't agree with the interpretations listed. And I would like to make sure it's noted that I do wish for them to be rescinded. Patrick did send an email saying that I'm assuming that they're not going to be, but I just wanted to make sure it's known that I did dispute that. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Kelly, is your hand up?
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
So, hi, my name's Kelly. I'm from Bristol, and I just firstly wanted to recognize the dedication and commitment and the bravery of the work that the board and community have been doing to try and not just get this budget done, but also to rebuild trust in our district. So thank you. As a community member, my expectation is that if a board member has opinions tonight or during any public meeting, that it be shared with the public. Please note, this is not just my lone opinion. This is backed by Carver's Guide of Policy Governance that you follow. In the first bullet point of Carver's Guide, it states in whole, be prepared to participate responsibly. Participating responsibly means to do your homework, come prepared to work. Sometimes the work is to listen. Agree and disagree as your values dictate, and accept the group decision as legitimate, even if not, in your opinion, correct. This is the part I want to highlight. It is not acceptable, for example, to have opinions, but not express them. Tonight, Patrick will be before the board presenting Monitoring Report 2.1, treatment of current and prospective students and parents/guardians, as well as Monitoring Report 2.2, treatment of staff. I would like to go on the record to state that I am in disagreement with the evidence provided in both reports, and I request the board reject them tonight. Board members, I do not envy your position, but I deeply appreciate you all, and I look forward to hearing all of your opinions tonight. For the record, I am worried about retaliation for publicly stating my opinions on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Sarah?
Hi, I'll be brief. And Jeannie, I just want to call attention, if any board members haven't had a chance to check email before this meeting, I want to call attention to an email that union leaders, in addition to myself, have sent with some questions about the methodology used for Monitoring Report 2.2, treatment of staff. Just wanted to direct your attention to some concerns we raised. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other public comment at this time? Our next step is an action item to approve. Oh, Courtney? Thank you, Kylie.
Yeah, sorry. I do also just want to voice my concern about both of the papers that have come out. I'm really concerned with the findings in them. So I just wanted to publicly state that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Now we'll move on to. Do either of you ladies have public comment before
Not today.
Just throwing it out there. Okay, then we'll move on, just making sure everyone's given a chance. So our next thing is an action item to approve the agenda. I do have one thing we need to talk about though, is that, we had action item E, that's the one, right?
It'd be D and E.
Oh, D and E. So those two things, because we're not exactly sure if the budget is gonna pass or not, it depends on which one we, which type of monies we go after. So because we don't have a budget passed, we can't actually make an action item on these two things. So those two things would be tabled. So action items D and E would be tabled. Does anyone have any questions about that?
And just a little further clarification, with a past budget, we can go forward in pursuit of a tax anticipation note, a TAN. That's a lower interest rate loan. That's what we normally do in any given year. In the event we don't have a passed budget by July 1, we would go for a current expense note, which is a higher interest. And so rather than get approval tonight and then have something different, we thought, looking at the timeline, we can wait until the June 18th meeting. Then we'll know which one of those two we need to pursue. So tabling it until June 18 made the most sense.
So the action item would be to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Kathy? Second. Kylie? All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended, please say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. The next is our consent agenda. I did want to pull out one item from that consent agenda, which is the minutes that are captured for the 30th of April. We had a request from a public member to amend their comment that's captured in those minutes. And I was able to confirm with the public member about what they want their public comment to actually read like. And so I can read that for you guys now. And, or do we have, is that right?
So we would act
Pull
to
it.
pull that,
Act to pull it
and then you
first.
could act on that. So you could act on the rest of the consent agenda and then act on that outside of the consent agenda.
Okay, so can I get a motion to pull the meeting minutes for the 30th of April from the consent agenda and move it to board management and governance?
So moved.
Kathy, second. Melissa, second. All those in favor, you say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And no abstentions. Okay, the motion passes. So that'll be in board management and governance. And now we can move on the consent agenda as a whole, which includes the meeting minutes from May 7th and the 14th, the pay orders and a resignation. I just need a motion for that. So moved. Kristen? Justin? All those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay. motion- Nobody is opposed. Everyone-
It was a delay.
Yeah, it was a delay. Okay, next is our executive limitations monitoring for A1 and A2. So first we have to have a motion to accept the monitoring report and then we can discuss it. So can I please have a motion to accept monitoring report?
Erin, I have a process question. Did you
Go
hear
ahead.
me? Okay, what does it mean to accept it? Because obviously that's something that people have asked about tonight. So if we accept it, does that mean, like, what does that mean?
To open a conversation, we use the action item to open a conversation. If at the end of it, we decide we're not in agreement or anything changes, we can go back and take that off.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. So we just need a motion to accept it and then we can open the conversation. Justin,
Second.
Kathy, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. So now we can talk about monitoring report 2.1. Everyone's eager. All right. So I had a couple questions if no one else wants to get started. So on pages 2 and then 6 and 7, you use Moncton in their handbook twice as evidence, but, and that's for, I guess, the summarize what students and families can expect. So I'm just wondering why just Moncton Central School for that?
So each year we sort of feature a different school as for their parent family handbooks as evidence. So last year, I think it was Robinson, I can't recall the year before that. But then we use that same piece of evidence each time it would appear to satisfy a segment of the policy.
Okay. And then I have a similar question about, are there other areas, because you mentioned the athletics and the activities handbook, are there other areas that also have handbooks that would exist? So you're using that in a similar fashion as you're doing the school handbooks or no?
So there are staff handbooks, parent family handbooks, the athletics and activities handbook. Those are the primary handbooks that are sort of widely distributed. We have some safety documents that are sort of in a handbooks fashion that are less applicable here. And there are some challenges with sharing the entirety of those more broadly. So that's the gist of the parent handbooks. There are other documents, like, so there, I think it references rights for parents for children with IEPs. You know, that's not so much a handbook, but it's a sort of a compilation of what they can expect.
Okay. Anyone else in the room?
Yeah, can I
I
try?
have-
Yep. I'm gonna just take Melissa first, Daniela.
Sorry.
Okay.
I guess was it your interpretation to only use one handbook out of the whole district, in doing the monitoring report versus looking at each one? Because if we're modifying each one each year, we should be looking at it each year to make sure to accommodate everything. If we only pick one, for all we know, Bristol's and Beeman's is a hot mess, but Moncton's is great, so why are we not reviewing all of them?
So the purpose of this, so typically these reports don't give an exhaustive list of everything that could possibly be considered evidence. That would be an overwhelming amount of information. So usually we pick an example for a piece of evidence that demonstrates compliance. And for things that are school specific, like these handbooks, we cycle them through each year, but we haven't ever shown every handbook every year. Certainly can. There's a lot of consistency across them, but that hasn't been the practice.
Yeah, and also, and this is just my learning, sorry, Danelle, and then I'll be quiet so you can answer a question, is why do we not have a similar handbook across each school? Like, what's so different between each school, right? Wouldn't it make it easier for everybody if we had it consistently? That's just probably me just needing to learn.
Yeah, I think there are more consistencies than not, and there are probably places where we can become more consistent. And part of what we try to strike a balance with is, where do we really have to be like very consistent, almost essentially the same across schools, and where is there variability based on a particular interest, issues, character, climate of a particular school or culture. So handbooks is one area where there's an effort to strike that balance.
Daniela?
Yes, so this might be a question for something that we need to consider for next year, but I noticed that when we're talking about treatment of current or prospective students and parents, guardians, we're not using any performance standards. Like, we're only using documents, and documents aren't sufficient. Like, yes, we can see the updates, but they're not sufficient to actually answer the question that's being asked here. Like, I wouldn't accept this for a student's dissertation proposal or like a program evaluation, because we're not actually seeing any sort of performance outcomes, which we know the American Association of Superintendents says is one of the key parts that we need to do in each of these. So I'm not saying that's something I'm going to ask that needs to be done right now, but I'm saying this should be something that for next year, there should be something like, at the very least, a survey that's going out to parents and guardians, as well as current and prospective students that can report this out. I guess that wasn't a question. That's just me saying, I don't think that this is sufficient and appropriate data to measure policy title 2.1.
No.
Patrick, to the extent that you can talk about it, can you tell me can you tell us what the status is of the two outstanding due process matters are?
In process, I'd say that's the extent to which I can speak to it.
Is that I just-
Has the board been made aware of both of those?
They're related to the same thing, yeah.
I think the first of the two was in one executive session.
I know that one,
Yeah,
but I wasn't familiar with the other one.
I know that we've fielded a lot of concerns today about that, and it's hard to bridge the gap of understanding when we can't talk about it. And despite the fact that these are still in motion, I was sort of grappling with the idea of, we're labeled out of compliance by the AOE, and yet we're in compliance on a report. So I'm wondering if there's how do we balance that?
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is, but or if anyone else has thoughts about how we balance that idea.
Yeah, it does feel like the kind of thing that could be acknowledged in a report to say, like, I understand that we're saying in process, but there have been some decisions. And I guess I'm also a little bit confused about why I'm hearing from family and community about decisions being made, but I haven't heard anything from the district. I'm guessing that must be confidentiality or FERPA or something like working its way through the system, but it is a little bit confusing to hear different things from different sides of I'm missing the word, of the compliance issues.
Well, I think it's really important to understand that just because there's been a complaint, that doesn't have anything to do with whether the district is compliant. If there's an unresolved complaint, is totally unrelated to compliance.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was resolved. That's the communication I'd gotten from family and community members. So that's my confusion. I'll shut down so Liz can talk.
Go ahead, Liz.
I would like to, and I think as carefully as I can clarify that we did do an executive session. This is making me think that maybe it was before you joined the board, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't remember if you were there specifically for that conversation. So it is in process though. And I feel very confident saying that is the case.
Yeah, it's just the label of out of compliance, which is hard to grapple with. It's hard to explain. It's hard to demonstrate the difference. Especially when perception really matters, right? The language matters about what we're showing and what we can show and what we can't. So I don't know how to make that more clear without giving anything else away about what's happening.
Is it possible to well, I guess I would be interested in making a motion to table this and maybe giving some more thought around how to think about the language in such a way to reflect the ongoing process. Or I don't know if that makes, but also it's like under which interpretation does that go, right? 1, 2, 3, or 5. So so it would be where we could indicate that there's more information. And I would say that what has been shared publicly has also been shared with us as a board. To also
say that communication has happened.
How are other people feeling about that idea?
I think that makes sense, to make sure it's properly documented in a way that can be without putting anything out there.
That's what I'm struggling with. I don't know what additional language I would add other than in process that doesn't risk the board or the district.
I think that the administration's in compliance. And so I think I would shy away from tabling 2.1 at this point.
And know that, it's in process now. Presumably it will come to a conclusion at some point between now and this report next year.
Right.
And whatever the conclusion is, can be
Correct.
reported on as a final determination in the next monitoring report.
And at any point, we can call up for a monitoring report, correct? We don't have to wait for a full year. We could ask at any point for a monitoring.
Or
report.
even just an update on that
Okay.
specific situation. Knowing that those things move very slowly.
I only had two other comments on this one. On page 5, you made a nod to how we had inadvertently, had some verbal concerns around student privacy. And we amended how we share information to the board in our financial reports to make sure that there's absolutely no way that those are done. Which is, great. And then on page 6, we list capital improvements, but I'm wondering about the HVAC work that's going on and the roof potentially. Just wondering if those need to live somewhere.
Yeah, historically, this section around capital improvements has really been specific to accessibility from a treatment of current or prospective parents, students, parents, or guardians.
Okay.
A case could be made that HVAC also has an impact on the treatment of students and prospective parents and guardians. It has historically focused on accessibility. It's the reason that
Okay.
that specific project was identified.
Any other questions on 2.1 from anybody?
Brad, can you elaborate a little bit, just like to put it out there? So one doesn't necessarily mean non-compliance. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah,
bit
I mean, I
so
think-
that everyone
I
can
just- I
follow
think
you?
In my view, my view, what I think is that if there's plenty of room for disagreement. Board members can disagree with what Patrick or somebody's doing. Community members can disagree with what, the administration is doing or what's happening in the schools. But that doesn't necessarily rise to whether or not the school system is compliant. And in the case of the outstanding due process matters, that is based on a disagreement about how the program should be implemented, and it hasn't been resolved. I suppose if the parents or if the due process hearing brought by parents say, and the school system doesn't afford the opportunity for a due process hearing, then okay, that's a compliance issue. But I mean, we're in the process, complying with the IDEA and with agency regulations and state educations. So that's really, I think in my view, that's what we need to evaluate on a compliance level. Again, totally different from whether we agree or disagree with the actual substance of whatever issue might be on the table. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think I was following you, but I'm not sure if other people were thinking about it in the same light.
Okay.
I think one doesn't necessarily have to mean the other.
Right.
But I could articulate it
Yeah.
a little better.
And, I also think that, moving forward on the compliance reports, and for the monitoring reports, the other one, you know, on the policy stuff. I think there might be some work we can do over time to work on the language that we use. Sometimes we may fall into a little bit too much eduspeak, which when that information gets disseminated, put on a website, it might mean something to board members, something different to Patrick and Floyd, and something, and then a third interpretation by a community member who's a former teacher, or a community member who knows nothing about education. So I think you have to be very careful with the language in these documents and not make them. When people talk about accessibility and transparency, I think one of the things we can do is to make these documents that we are required to create, you know, by law, make them maybe a little bit more accessible. And again, moving forward.
Accessible meaning through language.
Yeah, through-
Readable, yeah.
Right, yeah, it's so that understandable.
Yeah, in healthcare, we call it health literacy, right? Everyone has different health, so what's that for education? Education.
Right.
Any other questions or comments needed for 2.1? Hearing none. So we have a motion to accept the monitoring report, 2.1 treatment of current or prospective students.
I'm sorry,
Although
did Liz didn't make a motion to table?
she did, but then we've had conversation about it. I didn't hear anyone adding to the motion to table it.
Okay. So she didn't present it as a formal motion.
I think there was a motion on the floor prior to that opened the discussion where she answered that, so we'd have to complete that motion anyway.
Yeah.
Aaron, do you want to ask the questions?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're moving forward with accepting it first and no one's leaning towards wanting to table it.
How can we, so say it's accepted tonight, but we don't want to wait a year to look at it again, right? How can we make sure that it's put back on the agenda? Would that be part of the motion, or would we just take note tonight that it's going to be on the future agenda?
On the board work plan, right? We can put it on the board work plan, yep. It's, I'm not exactly sure what length of time to give it, because it depends on really when there's a resolution maybe, or actually something to discuss about it as it's moving forward. Yeah,
Maybe if the status changes. You know, if we get word from someone from the state or somehow things shift, we can bring it back and become informed for one, and then if we need to discuss or take action.
But also to Brad's point, like, do we want to change some language moving forward?
for the next iteration of it, yeah.
So process wise, so the board has two, and it's sort of connect to the questions that Aaron's gonna ask, right, is. So the board can change the language in the policy, and that directs different things of the superintendent. So that's one avenue to make changes that absolutely is in the board's authority. The board also has to determine, is my interpretation of the policy, which is written in here, acceptable? Is it a reasonable interpretation? You can say, no, it's not a reasonable interpretation, and direct me to bring back a different interpretation. And you get to decide if the evidence is sufficient or insufficient, and then direct me to bring back more or different evidence. Those are sort of
Those are all
the avenues that the board could take. And outside of that, so that's sort of for the monitoring report and policy development process. Outside of that, if there's a specific issue, like the one we were talking about, and the board wants to be updated on that, we can have those updates on that specific issue outside of needing to do an entire monitoring report again, at whatever frequency the board wants to have those updates.
Are we not having those updates regardless since we're in new process?
It's an admin complaint,
If we weren't asking like for it later, would we not get the update until potentially the next? I don't know, like the first executive session I went into, this isn't the first, so I don't know what the process is, and it's asking for clarity. If we're in the middle of an admin complaint or due process, or whatever the right terminology is, do we, as a board, get updates on those, be it in executive session or not, depending on what's needed, as they unfold and then conclude? I would think we should.
Well, therein lies the question, right? So this could unfold for years. I don't know that you want to meet weekly or monthly for years to get updates that will be pretty incremental. I think historically what we've done is when there's been some significant movement, then that's brought to the board and you're updated at that point. When it's just sort of slogging through and there's not a whole lot to report on, then we haven't bothered to invest the time for those things.
So
And there's a gray area there in terms of what's significant,
That's
what's
what I
not,
was just
but
gonna say, how are we
That's what I'm
interpreting that? Yeah.
There's been no change since us first hearing about anything.
more of the same, I guess is how I would describe it.
But we could also bake those into our superintendent check-ins and reviews that are quarterly.
Well, that's a good idea.
And then that way it's regular, routine, part of the check-in every time.
Mhm. And then if there's something in between that's significant, we can always bring that forward too.
And then I would assume that it would show up in monitoring reports, even just to keep a historical record of what's going on.
Yeah, similar to what, the one that really started a couple of years ago that came to a conclusion this year, and I made reference to that in the monitoring.
And I feel like when there were updates to be given, we had an executive session on the agenda to hold that space for those updates, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. That's been practice in the past, yeah.
Right.
So I have a series of questions to go through that's sort of just gonna walk us through. Yeah, Liz.
We could also say that we'd like our policy committee to take a look at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is the monitoring report sheet that I'm gonna fill out right now. And it's the official Board of Education response. So the first item is comments or questions from the board to Patrick about this monitoring report. So I'm gonna just write the comment that Liz just made, for example, the P&G committee can look at the policy. What other comments do you want captured?
That we'll get updates at the quarterly superintendent evaluation, is that what you said?
Anyone else?
That the policy governance committee will also look at different kinds of data that we want for progress monitoring.
Policy and governance too, so I guess that maybe it is with what Danelle said, like, I'll just stick to the handbook example, like, I don't think we should just be looking at one personally, if we're gonna have a different one for each school, and I'll just use that as an example. So maybe that's already covered under what Danelle just said, but.
Okay.
Erin, what was the first one you said?
What, policy and governance committee looking at the policy and interpretation. Any other comments or questions you want captured?
I'm just going to see if anything can- Do we have, so under the future capital improvements, like, do we have our plan, like, it's not, it doesn't look like it's in here. Like our future capital plan, do we have something prescriptive that we could link in here?
Yeah, it's linked in a different monitoring report.
What if we're talking about it here, maybe we add it here as well, right? Like a caption on business plan for future capital improvement.
Well, but in the context specifically of treatment of
Oh, for the.
parents and
Where do we
prospective
link
students.
it? Got it, okay, so where do we? link
So
it?
this is really highlighting specifically capital
Okay.
projects related to that. Two point three or 2.6, I can't recall, is where that plan is usually included.
That would make sense. Okay. Trying to learn it all.
You feel comfortable with that?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, the next question on here is based upon the information provided, does the board find that one, the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no? So thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. Liz? Yeah. Okay. So yes, you do find it's a reasonable interpretation. 2, based upon the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates accomplishment of this interpretation, yes or no?
Yeah, I'm a little here. I don't know.
So we're half at half,
Didn't-
a little over
didn't-
half. Can you put your thumbs back up for me for 1 second, please? Okay, thank you. If not, what other evidence does the board request? So some of you said no. What other information do you request?
I think there can be different levels of evidence, right? And I put my thumb up with that understanding, but I'm surprised, Danella, you're not speaking up right now, because you made a comment earlier about the evidence that you
Yeah,
think
the-
should be included.
I'm happy to speak up. I'm here. But to say, I'm just not clear what we can do this year versus what we can do next year. But my feeling is this doesn't really answer the questions, or the evidence that's here doesn't fully answer to me the treatment of current or prospective students and parents and guardians as interpreted by the superintendent. That I really feel like it would be beneficial to have some kind of performance evaluation or survey data. I'm also mindful of the fact that we still have a budget that hasn't passed and it's end of the year, and there's a lot of stuff we're trying to get done. So I guess that's why it took a little while for me to respond. I was going to abstain on this one because I'm like, I don't think this is sufficient, but I don't know that we actually have the time or the resources to ask the superintendent to get this data. I don't think that's appropriate to say, well, we just won't use it this year then. Like, so I'm on the fence. That's the data I'd like, but I don't think it's a realistic thing to ask at this point in time.
I would agree with that, but I also feel like there's research that needs to go into this and to figure out what we need to show evidences of what are those criteria?
So you're hinting at some sort of rubric, I
Yeah.
guess?
Yeah, the VSBA has some great resources on this too, which I'm sure everybody's already familiar with.
And is it something we think about, given the constraints of where we are right now, the school year's about to end, is this something we work on to create the rubric or come up with the data that we're looking for, and then we ask for a refresh of this monitoring report September or October, like as school is ramping back up? I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. So that, because I don't think waiting a whole other year is reasonable.
Okay. I guess I'll defer to Steve because some of this is gonna be in your policy and governance committee wheelhouse. So do you have any idea of what might be feasible?
Well, I think the rubric that people are referring to in the VSBA resources have to do with the superintendent evaluation in general, not specifically about a survey of the public of how the superintendent is doing. I think those are two slightly different things.
There are a lot of
Um,
states that do this kind of survey and do the reporting out at the state level every year. Vermont's Agency of Education obviously isn't resourced enough to do this, but that's more what I mean. I apologize that I said it was the Vermont School Board Association that had it, but yes, this is the kind of thing that is pretty typical and required in some states. Sorry to interrupt you, Steve.
yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say.
But is it something that we could add to just the policy and governance committee looking at this policy interpretation? And figuring out maybe how to embed other evidence for progress monitoring?
Sure, if that's what the board wants to do.
Thank you. All right, so the other evidence that the board's requesting for future, I guess, is the data, which might include survey data, and then also looking at metrics. or what we're comparing against. Right, is that what you meant, Barb?
Yeah.
Some sort of metric.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Everyone all set for 2.1?
So just in terms of clarity, so that's the feedback, which is helpful. It's less clear to me if there's a directive in there from the board, either to the Policy and Governance Committee or to the superintendent. And if there is, it would be helpful to just make that explicit and get it in the minutes as such. Otherwise, it's taken as feedback for consideration, and both the Policy and Governance and the superintendent can do that as they see fit.
Well, to avoid too many cooks in the kitchen, I think that if the Policy and Governance Committee can take a look at it first, and then we can see what recommendations come from a broader board standpoint, and then talk to you about that.
That then gives me clear direction if there are some specific actions that come through that process. Yeah.
So were you specifically asking the Policy and Governance Committee to create a rubrics?
We're specifically asking them to look at the policy, the interpretation, how we look at progress monitoring data, and how we might embed that.
Steve, is that enough direction for P and G?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, Danielle's on that committee, so I'm sure we can figure out what's going on with that.
Okay. All right. Is that it for 2.1? All those in favor of accepting monitoring report 2.1?
Sorry, I didn't think you were first or second.
We opened it with a first and a second, and we discussed it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So accepting the monitoring report with our feedback, we've collected the feedback. The only other part I don't feel is that we've looked at your comment, which is reviewing it again for putting a date on it. I don't know if you want to make some recommendation for that, or if we're just going to, how do you want to?
Yeah, I just like threw that out there in thin air. I guess I would look to the PMG committee on their thoughts, right? Like, am I being completely
Okay.
unreasonable
Okay.
to say that over
Okay.
the next, so June, July, August, that would be enough time for that committee to come together and come up with the data we need, the rubric, et cetera, whatever comes out of that discussion and that work to present that then to Patrick.
Okay.
I don't know, September meeting to then turn around a monitoring report. So I guess like, I just kind of picked dates. I don't want to be completely unreasonable, but do you think we should not wait a year and I was trying to find something in the middle?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was captured. Okay,
Yes, thank you.
yeah.
Can I
Right.
make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Perhaps what we should do is, see where we are after June 11th. And then we can decide whether or not
Yeah.
September or October
Yeah.
will work, just realistically speaking.
Well, we even had time to have committees. So
Right.
that also, we've got a backlog of committee work.
Not that I'm,
Yeah. Yeah.
trying to push it or anything, it's just the scope of what the board has in terms of workload already.
Well, then, if we were to table it tonight, would we then bring it back up in September, October, give you time, and would it give the Policy and Governance Committee time to look at it? So that you're not recreating the wheel, and that the monitoring report would be more conclusive.
That's why for me, it's a little tricky. Like if there's direction from the board to the Policy and Governance Committee to look at this and consider changes to bring back to the board for action, to update the policy, the report as it exists now, which speaks to the policy as it exists now. I'm lost a little bit there in terms of the intent. Like if we're looking at changing the policy and there was a policy change and subsequent to that policy change, or it was asked to be written in light of that change, like that makes some sense. But if there's changes, if there weren't changes pending and you just said, we want a 6-month check-in on the same information, or maybe this piece of information, that makes more sense to me, but I think until we know how the work with the P and G plays out, I don't have clarity on what direction I'm going in.
So if we tabled it tonight, it's essentially saying we're not sure if it's been
Yeah,
compliant.
I mean, I think by approving the report tonight doesn't prejudice the board's ability to follow up on some of the comments that various members of the board made tonight. But I think that tabling the report tonight to explore how we might make the report better is probably a very complicated and exercise that wouldn't necessarily achieve the results that we want.
So a yes vote means that we're accepting this as it's presented. A no vote means that we believe that it's an incomplete report.
That it's not compliant.
Correct.
I think it's compliant with the terms that were laid out at the start of this school year. And so I think that the Policy and Governance Committee, Steve, is that correct in thinking that we will look at this and look at a way to update it in the coming year on top of our other things?
Sure.
So feel free to vote however you want, but I am just gonna say, all those in favor of accepting monitoring report 2.1, treatment of current or prospective students, parents and guardians, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes.
I'm the abstention.
All right, thank you. One abstention. So for action item B, under executive limitations monitoring, so I need a motion to accept monitoring report 2.2 so we can open the discussion. Okay, Barb first, Melissa second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We can open the discussion. The 2.2 treatment of staff.
So I'll start. So in the staff survey question, one of the questions I had, so like the first thing is the pie chart. But I don't know how many people are even in that population, right? So if this is all MAUSD staff, whether that be janitor all the way up to the CEO, right? How many people is that, and how many people actually completed the survey? And was it actually sent out to everybody? So I guess those are some things I need to better understand, because while I can see the breakdown of where these people are from, if there's only 20 people there and we have 300 employees, I think it doesn't fit. Exactly.
Yeah. So the way the survey was distributed this year, building leaders sent it to their staff. Central office leaders sent it to so groups of folks that they work more closely with. What we've done historically has been central office leaders have sent the survey out to all 300 something employees, many of whom, just for the nature of the work, we don't work with closely on a regular basis. So the feedback we've gotten, it has been hard to sort of parse out in terms of actionable feedback because there's potentially 200 people that we haven't worked closely with. So to have more actionable feedback, we pared that down this year to folks that we work more closely with so that we get something that's more direct from immediate experience that we can act on. So the way that works then, a person could complete, so if we think about Mount Abe here, for example, an individual, say an educational assistant, could fill out one for the principal, one for one of the assistant principals, one for the other assistant principal, and therefore complete 3. Likewise, an admin assistant in central office could fill out one for Katrina and one for me and one for Beth. So the actual count of individual people would be hard to gather. I could give you a count of how many of the responses were from educational assistants, knowing that, In some cases, one assistant gave multiple responses.
Therefore, which leads into my next question, so. This phrase, the administrator represents our district well, demonstrating integrity and ethical behavior. So if this was sent out, I'm just gonna use it. Like if this was sent out from you to somebody that you work with, you're the administrator in
Correct.
this example.
Yep. If it's a building principal, and for, so the survey that I send out specifically states the superintendent. For principal, it says the principal. For assistant principal, it says this. So it's issued by title. This is bringing those results from all the administrators in the district because the policy speaks to sort of the conditions. It's not just me and my treatment, it's the conditions. So this is a collection of all the administrators in the district and the responses to the survey feedback.
Yes. Why are we getting feedback that a lot of people didn't even get an option to participate?
I'm not sure. So this was sent, so each building principal sent it out to their, and assistant principal sent it out to their constituent group. And each central office administrator sent it out to their constituent group. There are plenty of people that, for example, didn't get a survey from me or an opportunity to give feedback to me because I deemed that they were not someone that I worked regularly with this year. So that's part of what you're hearing, and that's a change this year to try and get feedback that's more actionable. So that's part of it. I think part of the concern that has been present has been a concern about anonymity. I've reassured folks that these are anonymous surveys. Some folks don't take that for what it is and choose not to fill it out. But those are the two concerns that have been raised: the anonymity, and which is an annual concern, and then the shift this year for specifically the 3 central office administrators that send this out.
So this was sent through still a Google survey instead of a
Google form, yeah.
Google. Why not Survey Monkey or something that could?
Yeah, so I just haven't had a chance to invest the time in a different tool that's going to enable me to see the results of an individual, to have conferences with them, and then take that information and gather it as a whole to put in a report for the whole district. So it really, whether that tool can do that or not, I don't know, and I haven't invested the time into that.
That's a very easy thing to do, and I'm really concerned about if we have a piece in here that says that there's not going to be retaliation. That's part of, like, on here, it's one of the things, right, that we say you can express dissent. When we did our survey of the community, I know that we were very careful to make sure that we weren't doing it through the MAUSD platform because we wanted to make sure that no emails would be captured. And so in order to say that this is an accurate representation, I mean, I have a lot of questions about the survey as to, like, why don't you know how many surveys are reported out in this? Why didn't you share that information with us to know exactly, like, it's kind of meaningless to get a survey if we don't actually know how many people participate in it versus how many people did it receive, like how many people got it in total. But I'm really concerned by what you're saying is that this is not an accurate representation of staff, and you explicitly say in it, all you have in your language is like, all faculty and staff, I'm trying to find my paperwork in front of me. All MAUSD faculty and staff were asked to respond to surveys in building and district levels. So I get the idea of professional growth, but I'm also saying, like, the wording in here isn't clear. The survey isn't something that's in any way reliable to us as the monitors of this policy. And so I'm pretty concerned about how this all played out. And hearing you say that, like, you don't have time to look at different systems, I feel like, well, bless your heart. Like, that doesn't take time. That's something very straightforward. And it's a basic thing that you have to do. You cannot survey your staff and put them at risk of having their identity that is just a junk survey to send out if you're not guaranteeing anonymity. And I'm really frustrated to hear you say that because I just feel like that is like basic practice 101. Okay, I'll stop. I'll take a breath.
So this is an anonymous survey. I just want to emphasize that.
What we're hearing from the staff is they're not confident, and it sounds like a year ago they asked for a different format. And so it's hard to hear that a format wasn't checked into after that feedback. I think all these feedback loops are really important to the success on everybody's level. And if we're not getting a full participation, like Daniela says, we're not getting a full picture. And who's dropping off of that information that has really valuable feedback of their everyday work, how people are working with them, what's working and what's not working. So I was sad to read that a year ago this was brought forward and we had a year to change that into a different format and it didn't happen.
Liz?
I would also notice that um, I think that there was a survey that was done in a way that perhaps felt better before, and that was alluded to. If so, I think that the format of the survey being different this year was a try at getting more actionable information, and I appreciate that. And if we as a board liked the previous way of going about it, then we should discuss more what that survey looked like. And I think it was called a 360 survey. And I'm not sure. There can be a concern that it's not anonymous. And so even if it's under a different format, how would that concern not necessarily still be there? So I get that it is something that can be done, and I appreciate that, Daniela. And I think that what was said was that it didn't investigate that yet and get it done. Not that it's not possible. So that's great that we're on the same page there, that a different format can be found, and that there were differences between this year and last year. And if we decide that the last year's version or the style of going about it, even if it's through a different system, was more preferable, then great. It's not trying a different and so also I'd like to say that there were also executive sessions where we got more of an anonymous breakdown of specific feedback is what I would say. So it didn't say from whom, but there was more information in a bigger, longer report. So I think that what we want to do right now is look at the same thing we just did with the last monitoring report. What would we like to be different, and how can we move forward to get the information that we're seeking? That's how I feel about it.
I hear you, Liz, and I think what you're saying is really important, and I agree with you, but I want to be very clear that asking people not to report or fill out, but sending it out through an MAUSD account automatically means it's not going to be anonymous and it has to be confidential. Like if MAUSD isn't big enough to have like a review of research, to my knowledge, I know other school districts do, but like this would never get approved. Like I would lose my job if I did a survey like this and tried to collect data and report it out on it. Well, I wouldn't necessarily lose my job because I have tenure, but it would be like a really big deal. Like it would be significant.
There is an option, right? We've done them through MAUSD in the past before that you can say, do not collect the emails. So
yeah, it
it's
has
not
to be,
say,
yeah.
It's not to say that it wasn't anonymous. So I don't know that we know whether or not it is, because even through Google, you can check that box. When we created surveys in the past that said, do not collect emails.
Yes. So that, and what we currently are hearing, like I'm new here, and what I'm hearing is that there's a fear of retaliation and that there's a lack of trust. I'm hearing that over and over again. So sending out a survey at a time when, like, if I know this and I've been here since January, I'm sure that you all know that in the central office. So then why wouldn't you be making more efforts to build trust with your staff? Like, this just seems very basic to me, a very basic thing to do to invite authentic feedback. And if you're not doing that, it doesn't feel like it's an authentic ask for feedback, especially when you're saying that you're like selectively sending it out. And then just giving it to us is like a reflection on the outcomes feels like you it just feels insulting to me. It feels, honestly, I'm feeling insulted to be like, you want me to take your word for something, knowing that there's not trust, knowing that you didn't do it anonymously, and then selectively sending it out to people and then trying to get us to be like, oh yeah, that shows that everything's fine. I know everything's not fine. I haven't been here for an entire 6 months yet. I know everything's not fine. Why aren't you doing more to fix that? Why aren't you doing
And
surveys that are asking you that?
and what
So
can
these-
we do to support that
Oh,
work, right? What can we do? So I think that's our role.
I mean, I agree with Liz. I think Daniela, you bring a lot to the table and a lot of expertise, and perhaps there are best practices out there that we need to look at. But this is sort of, in my view, kind of analogous to, as a parent going to a student teacher conference and hearing that, your student is failing when the teachers have known about it all along. It's so I get that. But I think that we would be useful to do a deep dive into the survey practice and pursuing best practices.
That was gonna be my question. Can you just briefly just kind of go through the process on how is the survey made, who's involved? And how is it disseminated, like through email, how is it presented? Just kind of the process.
So the survey, you'll notice consistency between the survey questions and the specific policy. The survey was created to specifically address the areas of this policy. I agree it's not the best survey, and it directly addresses the policy as evidence. It's designed for that purpose. In terms of the distribution, so the form is created for each administrator, and then building principals distributed out to their entire staff. The principal and I are the collaborators, so they see the results and I see their results. For assistant principals, they also distribute it to the staff, and the principal, assistant principal, and I are collaborators, so the three of us can see those results. For central office administrators, so Beth and I are collaborators and can see her results. Katrina and I are collaborators and can see her results. So that's sort of the distribution.
Separate form for each individual administrator.
Correct. And that
And then-
anonymous box that Liz talked about is checked. So it says, don't collect any information. If it's not anonymous, I don't know how to get the information. I don't know an administrator that knows how to get the information. So from my perspective, all along, this has been an anonymous survey. That has been my response each time the concern has been raised that some people were questioning it. I've not seen anything to suggest with clarity otherwise that it's not anonymous.
I think one of the things that I'm starting to become more concerned about in our different meetings is that you get feedback and it feels like you keep telling us that, like, you do the same thing and you give an explanation for it. So I'm particularly frustrated tonight to be like, I don't understand in the process of feedback, in particular, like the survey, that if you hear it's not anonymous and you're like, there can't possibly be another way to do it, like, obviously there is, or like at least the effort of trying and then communicating that. I think that's part of my frustration, is to be like, why is it that you get feedback on something and then the response is just to like say it again, but say it louder? Like, where is the point where you're actually doing some kind of reflection on what's going on? I'm sorry. I feel like I've gotten too personal in this one. Take a step back, but I feel like I think this is a bogus excuse, and it's reflecting a lack of self-awareness and critical reflection.
So part of the reflection that I do engage in is the reality that we have hundreds of people responding to these surveys every year. So the concern about anonymity, to Liz's point, perhaps that concern persists with some people in a different tool. I don't know. But that the concern has been heard, it's been reflected on. I've looked into the tool. I have no reason to believe the tool isn't anonymous. So to change to a different tool in a busy time of year when there's lots of other things happening, didn't happen this year. I'm not opposed to changing tools. I feel differently about whether that's needed or not, given my perspective on the level of anonymity of the tool. But it hasn't happened.
I don't think it's right, like, I believe you when you say it's anonymous, right? But I believe you, it doesn't mean everybody believes you, and if I worked here, I might still be hesitant, right, or wherever I work. So I don't think it's necessarily what you know to be true. It's more about just the staff satisfaction and showing them that you're hearing them and giving them what they ask for. It's something that's relatively easy, right? I don't think that, right, I think we could do our research and find that, yeah, it probably is anonymous if you do it this way, but there's questions on whether, right, there's that lack of trust. Are you doing it anonymously? Am I making sense?
Yes. And maybe to take that burden off you, it's going to a certain cohort of professionals and saying, what tool would you feel meets this criteria so that you would be inclined to fill this out and feel confident that it's anonymous, and have them do a little digging. So they're bringing forth a tool or two tools that they feel comfortable with, which then you're like, okay, great, let me learn how to plunk this info into this tool. Just to take that research component out for you, and you're not doing extra work that they're then like, well, this doesn't work either. They're like, here's two options. The other thing, and I don't know, without reaching anyone's confidentiality, it's also tricky just to understand in the way the survey results are laid out, like, where are we excelling and where do we need work? And because all of the administrators from the superintendent down to principals and assistant principals are all compiled into one cohort, it's just hard to understand, like, at those different levels, how things are working, would be my other feedback.
And it's sort of by design that way. Again, the policy really is talking about the conditions in the district. And so the board's only employee is the superintendent. So anything specific to the superintendent. So Liz talked about a deeper dive. That deeper dive historically has been specifically to basically the comments. So the total results of the survey that I send out that's about me and all of the comments that are made has been that deeper dive that we would do in an executive session, because that gets more evaluated. For the purposes of a monitoring report for the district, this is a culmination without the comments that can sometimes be harder to sift through. So it shows more the quantifiable evidence for the district in those conditions. But that's historically, this is the probably 7th year we've used that same survey in the same form with those questions. The only change this year being the central office administrators tightening up the group that completes the survey.
So how many surveys did you receive? Responses? did
So
you
each
receive?
question had a slightly different number because some people would skip a question or whatever, but in a neighborhood of 220 to 225.
Out of how many employees?
So there are full-time and part-time employees, not counting like ELP and others. The upper 200s, probably mid to upper 200s. But remember that some people would fill out multiple surveys. So that many responses doesn't equate to that many individuals.
So also I was looking at retained communication with staff. central office administrators routinely visit schools and occasionally serve on committees and or leadership teams. Can you tell me how many times everybody gets to the different schools? You know, who are the administrators and what's the average number of times they visit each one of the schools?
Yeah, so at least once or twice a month from scheduled in. So Katrina and I have the meetings monthly with smaller elementary school principals and twice a month with the larger schools.
At the
And
schools
then
themselves.
at the
You go-
schools
you go
themselves,
to the
yeah.
schools.
And then intermittently in between those regularly scheduled.
So you just pop in and say hi and.
You know, usually just a lot of popping in. There's usually a specific purpose for being there.
And what about special events? Does our leadership staff visit for special events, graduations, concerts? Do we get out of the office and get a chance
Sometimes.
to enjoy some of those?
Yep. Not as much as we'd like to,
Yeah,
but
how frequently
sometimes.
would that be?
I don't know if I could give you a frequency for that. Not frequently enough.
Well, I hope we all can get a graduation this year.
Some of us made the art show on Saturday.
So with interpretation, sitting here reading our lovely policy that somebody printed for me, thank you. What I'm hearing you say, and I'm just having a hard time reconciling, so I need some help here from whomever, is that the administration, central office, the principals, the vice principals were surveyed. But if I'm reading this and interpreting this correctly, which I may not be, this is really with regards to the superintendent and your treatment of staff. Am I not interpreting this?
Yeah, we had that conversation several years ago and the feedback was, and it made sense, this policy is not about me and my specific interactions with staff. This is about the conditions under which staff are treated, which isn't only me. There are lots of people involved in that.
That,
And
you know, so it feels like maybe we need to,
so that expanded to all administrators.
so, but this hasn't been updated, because that's not really the way that this reads. So I feel like, sorry, P and G committee, but I think we put that in something potentially else to your plate to revisit, because when you read it as it states today in this piece of paper, it sounds like this survey should have been about the superintendent. Though I don't disagree with you, Patrick, to get a view of what the staff feels, thinks, whatever. It wouldn't necessarily make sense just to do it on you, right? It's to do it on a greater whole. Just don't know that this matches right now as it stands.
When was that discussion you were talking about? When did that happen? That was a board decision, or that was a?
I don't know that it would have shown up as an action item, more as feedback on the process, and that would have been 5 or more years ago. I don't know if more veteran board members remember the conversation.
So then I think what we need to be careful of, right, because this board is a lot very new, so the date on this policy is 2018. We have a conversation with us 5 years ago. We need to be updating these things, because then how are we supposed to take this monitoring report and apply it to this? They don't match.
Well, and you'll notice that most of the policies are dated 2018. That's because that's when MAUSD was formed. So the policies would have been updated with sort of a new entity, even if the content wasn't necessarily changed.
But that's also a state collected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a revised date or
version
something.
of David.
Steve, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I just in terms of the way the policy is written, it says the superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions, which, when you, that's sort of taking responsibility for his staff, his immediate staff, as well as his own actions. So I don't necessarily have a problem. I don't think, past board review of this policy objected to this being more of a survey of how the administration is doing on a whole versus just a singular person. Because in the end, Patrick's responsible for his administration team. And if his administration team is falling down on the job, then it reflects on his performance. So
I think my problem is that we don't have data to find out where the weak spots are. You know, we just, yeah, we sent a survey out, but it's not indicative of being in compliance with this policy.
And the goals formulated from
Previous-
the feedback,
Yeah.
yeah.
Previously done.
Kathy, what sort of a survey would you find that would demonstrate compliance?
I would have to look at a broad spectrum of different surveys that are available, Steve, but I'm looking at the one that was presented, and we just don't have the data that says, you know, staff feel confident in leadership, that they feel protected, that they feel that they're not being targeted.
You'd want questions that specifically said that?
I would look at it all the way around to word it differently, Steve, but I just don't think we have the data here to support that this policy is in fact being upheld.
I agree with Kathy in that I can see how this policy is very specifically or the survey is specifically created to align with the policy, but I feel like a survey, especially a survey of staff, can be used as such a great tool in getting information that, you know, that you can be actionable with, right, to improve work conditions and therefore education of our children. And so if we're sending out a staff survey, rather than sending out numerous surveys, maybe there's a way we can capture not only the information that's required for this policy, but other helpful information as well.
Well, I think Patrick mentioned that there are comments that come back in this survey, but those are kept confidential. And we sometimes see those in executive session instead of them being broadcast publicly, because there can be information in them that's, you know, demeaning or disrespectful. And we try to be, you know, careful about that. I think what's been placed in this presentation is an overall, you know, percentage of folks who feel a certain way about the question that is directly related to the question in our policy. So there is more information in these surveys, but this has been tailored to provide an overall picture of how we're complying with the way the policy is worded.
I guess therein lies the rub when you're working with policy governance, is that you're stuck with trying to constantly defend a policy rather than looking at meaningful exchange with what's happening within the district. So, yeah,
Well, if you don't, so then you change the policy. It's not a problem with policy governance. It's a problem with how you implement it.
And it's easy to hide behind.
Only if you let it.
There you go.
Yep, 1 second. I'm just gonna grab Liz and then you. Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
So would we like to bring this policy to the Policy Governance Committee as well? And under no circumstances do we evaluate employees publicly. We don't do it. And I don't think that matters if you're policy governance or not. I can see looking for actionable steps for improvement. Our ends report does that. That's always an important piece of monitoring, is because nothing is ever when we're being honest about anything, there's always room for improvement. So find a way to put some actionable steps towards where we want to go, or what we're striving for as that ultimate goal. I would say yes, but I can't see a circumstance where we would ever, policy, governance or not, publicly evaluate any employee of our district. So that evaluate anyone. That's just an executive session action.
Yes, I can kind of pinpoint where my like internal unrest is for this. It says, the intent of the surveys was to gather feedback for professional growth for individuals and organizations and the organization, as well as look more holistically at the conditions that are caused or allowed to occur within MAUSD that might be considered unfair, undignified, disorganized, or unclear. So for me, the survey doesn't show evidence of that paragraph of the intent. It's not enough. Yes, I'm looking more for some sort of almost narrative of like, through the survey, we discovered this feedback, this feedback, this feedback, and we're doing because we're looking at conditions that are caused or allowed to occur and gather feedback for professional growth. So the survey compiles the information of how people are feeling, but I don't know if it targets the other part of that paragraph.
To go with what Ashley said, my experience has always been, you do the survey, you interpret the survey, and you summarize it and present it, but you also provide the actual granular data and you scrub it. For example, if there are identifiable comments, you can remove that. So you or your staff scrub that. And then you present your summary, but also the data to support that so that people can then also make their own, I guess, analysis as well if they want to. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, it
It
feels
part of
like
what
it's
you were
not
saying?
in depth, not deep enough for what the actual ask is.
Liz, is your hand up from before or again? Okay. Yeah, I had similar questions, like, do you feel like the data you're collecting is actually helping you facilitate change to actually move? Because if the data you're collecting not only doesn't really give a full narrative for what you need, then it's also not helpful for you. So, you know, if it's not facilitating any change or helping you move or get that growth mindset, then that's another reason to look at the other half of that statement.
Just a clarifying question. So the way I'm reading this is, or maybe I misheard, but I'm wondering if this is exclusively for you, Patrick, or is this, I thought I heard you say is that the schools themselves gave it to their staff, so they got the feedback. Is this embedded? Is the feedback they got from their staff embedded in this? And then my next question is, if it's a yes, how do you filter out each administrator, and how could the information that's received become helpful to them to be a better administrator? So I think those are just the pieces that I'm unclear about. I mean, I am impressed that, exceeding expectations, that, we got pretty much go across the board. It's in the 50 or 60. That's good. And the not meeting expectations is extremely low. So whoever's responding is giving some sort of keep going the way you're going. But
I think it's,
I'm not sure how you use the information. so-
On the other hand, if you've got one person answering it 3 times.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, I know you guys have to do this, but I think it could be,
So to answer your 2 questions, what you see here as a public document is, which is speaking to the policy and the conditions in the district, is a combination of all of the administrators in the district and the results from their surveys. Myself and the administrator, and when it's an assistant principal, their supervisor, the principal, so 2 or 3 people for each of these can see the result, their own
our
results.
own results.
And so themselves and their supervisors, I guess is another way to say that,
Mhm.
can access their specific results. And we have individualized conversations about their specific results.
Okay, thank you.
I think too, just to be playing devil's advocate. We're seeing a subset of responses, but on the other hand, when we're getting this idea of the retaliation or the anonymity factor, there might be another subset of people who have different opinions about how things are going that aren't responding. So this data could be biased towards just the good things because those people feel comfortable responding. So I want to be leery of the data too. Not because I don't want to be impressed by it, but because I think we're maybe only getting half of the picture. And that's something that sounds like we're really interested in rectifying so that we can get that big picture.
And to move things forward, can we make, I don't know how this works.
Yep.
So, can we make an ask for a different evaluation process? Is it too late? What's kind
Yeah,
of the
that's a
option
really great question.
in terms of this?
Well, I think in terms of this report, we could go through our evaluation like we did with the previous one, capture our questions, comments. Ask ourselves, is it reasonable and does it accomplish it? What do we request? And if we're saying, no, it's not reasonable and no, it doesn't accomplish what we want it to, then I think Patrick would go back to redoing it. I'm not really sure what the process is for a denied monitoring report, actually. But that would be where we start if this isn't something we're satisfied with as a board. And then we have our questions and our comments as to what we'd like to see. And hopefully those can be utilized.
I mean, it gets back to the same issue as in the first report we discussed tonight. I mean, because the report says that Patrick shall not operate without written personnel rules that clarify rules, evaluation procedures, and job responsibilities for staff, provide for the effective handling of grievances, and protect against wrongful conditions such as nepotism and grossly preferential treatment for personal reasons. So, I mean, the standard, you know, the threshold is that Patrick needs to do, we have to have written, you know, rules that address these 3 areas. We have written rules. Now, we all, again, there's a big question of whether or not the data that we're collecting leads predictably to, say, for example, effective handling of grievances. But again, that's a different question as to whether or not there's, you know, compliance with the, with what Patrick is being asked to do.
Not sure I'm understanding you. Because how can we know if the data is not good data? How can we answer the question? Right, like, did he ask about nepotism or preferential treatment or retaliation?
No. Survey result.
Did he operate without written rules?
So,
I mean, that's the threshold for me.
okay,
I mean, I get,
So how do you,
the concern.
how do you determine if he operated without written rules?
I mean, there has to be, yeah, I mean, well, there are, I mean, we have written rules. No one's told me we don't have written rules.
Okay.
Now, whether there's a question of the validity of the data collection, okay, that's something we need to look at. But we have the framework, I think. And, and we also have, as a board, we have a responsibility to raise questions about whether or not in, the administration's, prosecution of this charge, that, the administration is going about it in the right way. And that's what we're doing. That's what I think we're doing pretty effectively tonight.
I agree the foundation. I agree there's the written rules, but I just don't feel like there's the evidence to support that it's followed.
I think we come back to the charge that with respect to the treatment of paid and volunteer staff, the superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions that are unfair, undignified, disorganized, or unclear. And nowhere in the evidence presented are those conditions addressed.
Daniela?
Yes, Brad, I so appreciate your clarification about going back to the policy governance, and I love the fact that that lady printed it out for us who taught us about this, because point 2 under 2.2 is that the superintendent, we've got shall not retaliate, right? Shall not retaliate against any staff member for disruptive expression of dissent. And so when I think about if that's something that is in here that we think is important, how are we measuring that? And if we're hearing from folks employed by the district that they don't feel like they can participate in a survey because it's not anonymous, I'm not going to make any sort of policy decisions based on that inference, but those feel pretty closely linked there. So lacking a survey that feels reliable, because we don't know who actually, not that we don't know who filled out, we don't know the numbers of it. We don't have any like background information about the survey. Like I think Kylie and Melissa were talking about I can't actually see your faces just based on what people were saying. I agree with all of that, but I'm going to say it appears to me that there is no evidence in what's been provided to support point 2. And that is really, I think that's a good place also to say, I'm concerned about that. And I'd like to see evidence that supports that as stated in our current policy manual.
But wouldn't the best evidence be if someone actually files an objection because they were retaliated against? I mean, that would be the best evidence, right?
That cannot be the only evidence that we have for teachers feeling like they're not being retaliated against. Like that takes it to the highest possible level. If we have teachers who don't feel comfortable participating in a survey that's sent out by the superintendent because it's not anonymous, that is pretty darn clear that there's a problem. So I'm going to say, no, I do not think that that would be where I'd go, is to the highest possible level, especially when we're looking at something as important as the well-being of our entire district educators, right? We want to have, to me, that needs to be the baseline, is that educators need to feel safe and supported in a school district. Otherwise, the wheels have come off the bus. So I'd say, no, I want to see otherwise. But you know what? We probably are going to agree to disagree on this one. So I appreciate you bringing up that point.
And I think it's a worthy discussion. I mean, it gets to having to prove a negative. I get on retaliation is one issue, but there are many other bad things that could happen within a school district. So does that mean that we have to go about, proving that something didn't happen? It sounds unmanageable given our resources and, and personnel expectations.
I'm not following that. Can you clarify what you mean there?
Well, if a different issue, say, than retaliation. I mean, yeah. As I said before, I think that the best evidence of whether there's retaliation is whether actual instances of retaliation and what the administration, how they responded to that sort of allegation and how, and you know, what steps we're taking to make sure it didn't happen again. But there are many, many other issues that could take place in a school system that, again, what's being suggested is that that Patrick or the administration create data to support the fact that there was no retaliation. I just don't think that that's a very.
No, that's
I
not what
just
I'm
don't-
trying to say. I'm trying to say that the survey design and the way that it's been put out is basically looks like it's cherry picking and it's not giving us actual evidence. So it's not that he needs to prove that there's no retaliation. You're absolutely right that the staff, the retaliation would be important there. But it's actually saying that when you have people reporting that they're not comfortable completing the survey, that suggests that there is a problem, which is why it's even more concerning that the data isn't there. I don't think we need to create separate procedures to show everything that's not happening. And I do think this is really important. You know, we've talked about a couple of like foundational pieces, but the well-being of faculty, staff, folks working in the district to me is incredibly important. And we don't have in this report right here, we don't have reliable data there. And so, yes, I don't know that you and I are talking about the same things, but I want to say I am concerned and I do not feel like we have evidence that's going to say that retaliation is not a concern. I think we have a number of data points that are suggesting retaliation is a concern, including people speaking at our meeting. So that to me is my worry here.
Barb,
Hearing both of you, I'm hearing different issues. I'm hearing the anonymity and optimistic. But I'm also hearing that there isn't an alignment to the criteria for the survey that's specific to the evaluation. And I think that's where we need to change the process. And I hear that we're going down in the weeds and the reasons for it, but I don't think this is meeting the needs of what we need to do. So if somehow, like, this all looks good, but I just feel, at this point in time, for me, I couldn't make a decision. I feel still it's too ambiguous to what we're asking. How can we do that? Steve?
So somebody brought up item number 2, retaliate against any staff member for non-disruptive expression of dissent. And I'm reading the survey, and number 5 says the administrator is receptive to the perspectives and or beliefs of others, even when they are different from their own. That doesn't say that topic explicitly, but I think that's where that's covered. And there were a little more than a quarter of the respondents who didn't give a 0.4 exceeds expectation rating on it. And I assume that under those other categories, the 1, 2s, and 3s, that there were probably some comments that were included with the survey that we're not privy to, that may, address that sort of issue.
I think that could be a valid point if there weren't limitations to the survey and that we don't know if it's statistically significant. And we don't know if it's biased, like Aaron said. It's just, it's not well designed yet.
Did I get cut off or muted or something?
oh, you're good, Steve.
Sorry, I cut you off maybe.
Oh, I just was I was wondering, in the past we have looked at this data in executive session if we wanted to get the granular data that's included with this. I think item number 5 in the survey was intended, Patrick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, to address point number 2. And there might be comments in that data set that relate to how we did on that point outside of people who voted, the highest score. I agree. If there's a perception that it's not anonymous, then we obviously need to address that somehow. But I think the type of survey that was given, the amount of data that was collected, we could expand upon how much we want to see of that is appropriate. I also agree that we probably ought to see out of the people who were invited to respond, how many actually responded. I think that's an important data point that could be, and I think we actually saw that in some of the earlier versions of this. So
Really important that all the MAUSD employees fill it out as stated. I think
Like, I don't,
it's really, yeah, I just think it's really hard to take it, because it says all everywhere. Even on the top of the survey, the following survey was distributed to all MAUSD staff, and just that part isn't accurate.
I would say it is accurate.
It was just
They
by
can
whom
get
it was
it.
distributed.
Right, you can get it, but choose, you could opt out.
But it wasn't sent to all.
Everyone did get it.
I'm confused. I thought a few were, or certain people were picked based on their direct.
So
connection.
building principals would send it to everyone in their building. So even right there, that's everyone but central office. And then central office all got a chance to respond to Katrina, Beth, and I, but there were people even outside of central office that also had an opportunity to respond. So collectively, everyone did have an opportunity to provide feedback to at least one person, and in many cases, more than one person.
That was not clear to me.
Yeah, what if you're, no, what if I work at, let's say devil's advocate, I work at a school that's not getting the opportunity to evaluate someone I work with, but, yeah, okay, I guess that's a question. But I want to give feedback. How does that work?
So if I work at Beaman and I'm presented this survey, it's clear that I'm just addressing the Beaman
Principal.
administration.
For the most part, yeah, there would be some people that would be at Beaman for a portion of their time as well, that would have others that they could.
Okay,
So a special educator who also works at Beaman would have had an opportunity to provide feedback to Beth.
so then where does the Beaman staff, and me as an educator, where would I have an opportunity to answer a survey about you and about Beth and about Katrina? Where would I have that opportunity? Because one answer to one survey is confusing to me when there's so many different outliers here.
Yeah, so historically, that opportunity would come because we would send it to all, say 300, I think it's less than that, employees. The challenge with that is, again, the nature of the work, there are a lot of people that we're getting feedback from that we don't work directly with, which makes it tricky to get actionable feedback. So the change this year was to pare that down. So for me, it was everyone that's in central office and the entire team of administrators, building principals, assistant principals. So that sort of group that I work very routinely with.
I feel like you could do that in Survey Monkey.
Yeah.
It could, unless I'm not following you. It would do it for you if they just select who their administrator is or where they work or whatever, and then it would silo people for you. Is that what?
I think it's also important for, using Kathy as an example, right? Well, yes, it's probably valuable, should be valuable information if you sent the survey to Boyd and Beck, for example, right? Because they work with you directly. That's like a 360 evaluation. So that's important information. But you also impact Beaman and Bristol. Moncton, all of it, right? So I think, yes, we want to hear feedback maybe on our building principals and vice principals, but I think we need to also offer the opportunity for the staff at each one of those schools, because from what we've heard in your presentations, they're interacting with you, right? So they should be providing feedback on those interactions as well. So it's almost like each person should be doing 2 surveys, one for their building principal and one for the central office staff. Maybe that's not the right approach, but just trying to think about how you get that and that it is meaningful. And I almost think too, we could have Moncton, everybody's giving 5s across the board, but at Beaman, everybody's getting 1s, and you're lumping it all together and skewing it, right? So now we don't know that Beaman's got a huge issue, Moncton's flying high. Okay, Moncton, what are you doing that's working? Let's talk to Beaman, right? So we're muddying the waters and not allowing bifurcation of that data to make actionable steps forward.
But that's the work that I do with principals as their supervisor. The board doesn't supervise principals.
I don't disagree, but I think it would be important information to see it in the report.
Well, and maybe it's how have you disseminated all of that information, and then what are the steps forward towards, if you noticed for her example, then what are those steps that you're taking to improve a building that's obviously showing that it's having some challenges in those arenas, I think is where, yeah, we don't need to know what's happening, but like, how is that then changing your work and how you're working with those buildings individually? I think it's.
And like, at the end of the day, if I would love to continue to see monitoring reports that show that we're like knocking it out of the park, like that's our goal, right? Again, I'm sitting at this table struggling to reconcile what I'm hearing in my community and what I'm getting from the administration. And that's where as a board member, I can't seem to move forward because the stories are so different. So I just feel like we need a different approach. And I'm not saying we're gonna necessarily reconcile it 100%, like, but it feels like we're just so far apart and it's not making sense.
Another point. The superintendent shall not cause or allow conditions that are unfair, undignified, disorganized, or unclear. That's the intent. But when you read the survey, a lot of it starts with the administrator represents, or the administrator supports, the administrator. But by just evaluating the administrator, we're not really evaluating the culture within the schools. So how are people, what's the morale, right? Like how are staff treating each other? I feel like that's not captured. Again, just another point. I feel very passionate about surveys, by the way. I've done a lot of them. That can be an amazing tool.
Liz?
So, my thought is, I mean, not to be, if we tabled it and maybe had something really specific, like maybe we would feel more comfortable if the survey was designed to be in a different format. I mean, I don't know what time we have right now till the end of the year. I mean, it would have to probably be the fall, but if this is one that we want to see a different survey done so that we feel more confident, that people feel comfortable taking the survey, and have that sent out and see what the results are of that. And I don't know a lot about surveys, but if you can get something in there about morale, perhaps. But I would say I feel it's important for this to be reflective of kind of the direction that it's going. I like the action steps still. I still like hearing what's being done to move forward. That's kind of a question we could ask. But there is one specifically for the superintendent, and that is a different policy. So if we're going to make this policy evaluating the same thing as the other policy, then we'd have to think about that and whether or not we need both of them. This one is supposed to be doing something different than the superintendent evaluation. And there is not there's not an entire lack of evidence. The district advisory council is in there, and that's huge. Years in the making, and definitely evidence. Regular meetings with union leadership, that's used as evidence often, and I think also significant. So I wouldn't say that there's no evidence at all.
Excellent. Yeah, one more, Daniela.
Yeah, I think that as we've been talking about all these different options, I think, Liz, you're absolutely right about the fact that there is other forms of evidence in here. I'm also aware that, Erin, you pulled together a survey quite quickly and got significant feedback. So when we say like, this is one where I'm less concerned about, can we do it within the time that we have? Like, yeah, that can easily go out and go out again. What I would like to suggest is that this survey goes out again to everyone, same survey, no changes, so that we can get like the full accurate reporting in. This is not to evaluate you, Patrick. This is about evaluating this particular standard and giving everybody a chance, again, to respond in a way that ensures anonymity. It seems like there are quite a few people here who are skilled at survey design and might be able to assist with that process about taking that survey and plunking it into something like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or some other system. But I'd like to propose that we do have time to do this if it feels important. But I also, I'll add one more piece. I would be interested to hear back from MAUSD's Education Association about whether or not that's something that they would find to be helpful this year. Because if that's something that they feel like would be useful, then I would fully support it. Did that make sense? I took a little bird walk there.
I think at the end of the day, we need to remember that this isn't about personalities. This is about just making things better and seeing how we can get there easily.
Or maybe not easily, but how we can make, well, it is,
Or
it's
more
about
easily.
actionable steps, right?
Yeah.
It's about how we're taking data and making it and using it and
Yeah.
using it well, but we have to have a robust picture, an accurate representation to do that. But, so I'm just gonna read out some things I've been jotting down as you guys have been talking around the table, as comments and questions that we have in response to this monitoring report. And feel free to correct me or tell me other things I didn't capture. So things that I've been writing, we've been talking about a new survey tool, maybe collaborating with a cohort to identify a new tool or develop it. We've been talking about how we separate data to show which areas of the organization is flourishing, how we're improving, where we're falling short. We talked about how to bring it to the P&G committee to review the policy and to perhaps look at other areas for data. And then we talked about making sure that all staff get the surveys, even though in some respects they do, and some seems less clear. How we get response rate percentage and how we demonstrate how and where that data is being used. Is there anything I left out? Good thing. Okay. So if we'd like to walk through the official Board of Education response, the questions would be, based upon the information provided, does the board find that, one, the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable, yes or no? Up is yes, down is no. Okay, so as a group, we're saying no, it does not. Based upon the information provided, does the board find that the data demonstrates accomplishment of this interpretation, yes or no? As a group, it does not. If not, what other evidence does the board request? So we've sort of captured that in some of our comments, but is there anything else?
I would entertain I think the idea should be entertained, that you said a cohort, be gathered to select a new tool, but perhaps also be involved in creating the survey. Or providing input or feedback before it's finalized. District Advisory Council, I know is meeting mostly about the strategic plan, is that correct? Is that something that could be brought, you know, in front of that group that's already like people from all over the district and already gathering? Other than,
We have one meeting left, so we would stop the other work and do that.
I don't know if it needs to be like a huge undertaking, but probably some of the people are on the call tonight, so they've heard this conversation already.
Any other thoughts before we move? Okay. So all those in favor of accepting monitoring report 2.2 treatment of staff, please say aye.
I,
All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? One abstention. Two opposed. One abstention. Okay.
Two opposed? There's more than. no,
Oh, sorry, a 2-4. I'm sorry, my brain is counted a 2-4, one abstention. Sorry. Thank you. The next item in our executive limitations monitoring is an update for the financial report. Questions, concerns, comments for Floyd?
I don't remember if I brought this up last time, I apologize, for the anticipated encumbrance amount, can we add more detail into this report so that we know what, like, I know we know the amount, but it says 1.82 to building improvements, 185 to bed professional services, so for the 1.8, can we be more prescriptive in this report as to, I mean, like, we know it's the Moncton parking lot, we know it's the HVAC, I feel like there was one more thing that I'm forgetting, so can we detail that out more?
Sure.
I think also that's something that the finance committee does look at when they have finance committee meetings, those kinds of details. And
Yeah.
I just think it would be good.
and the purpose of the finance committee, as of the other committees, is to inform the broader board. So that, and one of the, and to, you know, induce a little bit greater efficiency in our board activities by having a committee that can, you know, flag things that ought to be looked at more, you know, by the full board. So, I mean, I'm not against that, but I'm just saying it's sort of kind of going backwards a little bit to where the board was before we had committees.
So that's helpful. Thank you for adding clarity because I missed that on one finance.
Right. I get that.
Kind of disaster, so I do appreciate that. I think my only response or pushback, I don't think that's even the right terminology, but would just be because it would put it all in the financial report and people go for the board meeting, just to find those. One place, that's my thought. Ease of access.
Steve?
All
No.
set.
Just probably could say what Brad said.
Anybody else have questions or comments about the financial report?
I had a question about looking at non-current assets, property, plant, equipment, net of depreciation. Can somebody explain that to me?
Sure.
So think of, this building that we're looking at, what's the value that we're sitting in? What's the value of it, net of the depreciation that we've taken over the years here? Or, the copier, lease agreement that we have, that is also depreciated, the value that we state is an asset to us that's depreciated. This is the number of what, if we were to liquidate everything and it was sold at the value that it was depreciated to today, that's the number.
And that's across the district. That's not just for money.
I'm not sure which number you're looking at.
Eight
but I'm
million,
guessing
two hundred
you're
and
on page two,
seventy-two,
where you're
935.
8 million,
Yeah,
8.2, is that it?
8.272.
Yep.
Yep. And the retirement of debt, what was the debt?
Not sure where you talking.
Right below the 8,272,000.
So out of our payment this year for Robinson, 55,000 is retiring debt.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Supposed to be item V, update on superintendent's report. Any questions or comments for that?
Did I miss Bristol? Or did they just not participate this time?
I think sometimes, yeah, some skip or they'll show up in another one.
It was.
Bristol's in there. Bristol's on page, I can't quite, there's no page numbers, but they're in there. They're very at the very end.
Oh, okay, so I think that was still not either, I guess. Thank you.
Yep.
I always appreciate the addition of the picture. Nice to
Yeah,
see the
that's great.
Thank you for that.
Okay. We'll move down to the board management and governance section. So our first item A is approving the board of directors policy for posting.
I'll make a motion to approve the board of directors policy for posting.
Keith, a second.
Second.
Brad? Any questions?
So I got some comments. And Patrick, these are I think the ones that have been discussed prior. I noticed that you did make a bunch of changes that were necessary probably for other reasons, but there were a few that we suggested in the P&G committee. One of them was the name of the policy, and now it's, instead of board of directors policy, you're calling it the summary of benefits. I don't know if there's maybe a better label for it in terms of board members understanding what this does, as it's really a contract agreement for all the employees that are not under the collective bargaining agreement. I mean, that's clear. I think if you read down a little further, I'm not sure that the title necessarily conveys that, although I know it's a mouthful to try to put any title to that. So that was one thing, was just what the title of the thing was. And then under the, you scroll down to the pay wages, which is on page 7. It says both hourly rates and salary rates will be set at the time of employment based on the board's compensation plan. And I think we wanted that title to match what the schedule said at the end of the document, because that's what this is, I think, intended to refer to. And if that's a appendix, that appendix would be referenced in that sentence. Right now, that schedule shows up after the health insurance appendix, but the title of that schedule is different than board's compensation plan, and it's also not discussed anywhere else in the previous in the beginning document. In other words, there's no reference to it directly. It just shows up after the health insurance appendix. So I would suggest it be Appendix B, after Appendix A being the health insurance one, and that if it's called, and the schedule is labeled Mount Abraham Unified School District Support Staff Compensation Plan. I think that's the title you could use in the pay wages sentence, and reference the appendix, and then the thing would be tied together. And then the very last thing was at the very bottom of the schedule, there's a series of notes. And the very first one says compensation shall be reviewed by the school board annually prior to budgeting. And I think that timeline is, we've never followed that timeline. It's always been, we're looking at it now, which is after the CBAs have been resolved, or after contracts have been sent out, or something like that. And I don't know what the correct wording for that is, or whether or not we even need to say anything about it. Or maybe we just say compensation shall be reviewed by the school board annually, and then don't place a timeline on it.
Yeah, because otherwise it's changing the language to reflect the practice, or changing the practice to reflect the language, which, yeah. So
Right.
broader seems better. I think the practice has been for this to follow settlements with collective bargaining agreements, good reason, which was against that timeline as written. So yeah, something broader. Just trying to get to that section now.
Page 13.
Thank you.
It's the very last page.
Like, Steve, I read that a little bit differently. I sort of read that as the onus was on us to look at, we've committed to this amount of money, and we need to review it as we're creating the budget. I looked at some different lens, I guess.
Well, even looking at that in terms of our broader negotiations, as you know, I mean, our negotiations for support staff only wrapped up last month. Typically, we're 2 months beyond, a month or two beyond the actual budget vote. So, if we're trying to approve this budget, this compensation plan prior to budgeting, and we haven't finished negotiating with our constituent, with our staff, it's a little difficult to say that, we're going to edit this document. If number one should be looked at in a completely different fashion, I think it might want to be worded differently. And that's why I was just saying, if we want to just say compensation shall be reviewed by the school board annually, then it's not really, it could cover both bases. We could say, yes, we're looking at it during the budgeting season, sort of in a preliminary fashion, and we're finalizing it after, after the budget vote. But we don't actually place that timeline in this sentence. We just say we have to look at it every year. And that might be important to say anyway, because a lot of these agreements are multi-year agreements that are outside of this policy. So if we're looking at this one annually, at least that sets the timeline for how often we look at it.
Any other thoughts?
And Patrick, just so other folks are aware, the amounts in this schedule are tailored to sort of follow the support staff agreement.
Correct. In particular, the new money, the schedule in this is very different than the structure that's in the support staff agreement. So the best way to apply the support staff agreement is to use the new money figure.
Right.
So is that when you open up the ELP pay rate proposal, line 2, academic enrichment support, pay $15 an hour. That's correct?
Yeah, so ELP has different requirements placed on it by their grant. So their salary structure conforms more to grant requirements than necessarily the collectively bargained support staff agreement. So that looks a little different.
Okay, thank you.
And this is a fairly recent change in light of some of with the granting agency and looking at how differently to structure that to make sense and be compliant. Mostly there are some sort of intermediate steps that have been added. So it used to just sort of jump from 15 to 20 to 25.
Mhm.
And there are some positions that whose responsibilities are sort of in between what those rates of pay were. So this was a way to recognize that with the compensation plan.
So Patrick, I think just stepping way back to the beginning, one of the things that I thought was odd about this is it's called a policy. And it's really an agreement, a contract agreement, not necessarily a policy. So even stepping down into the next, below the date, it says policy area and policy subject. I think we might want to just find some other way to start this off.
Mhm.
I don't know. I can't come up with a good generic term for folks who are not covered by the other contracts that sort of is, brief but comprehensive. It's a struggle. So
The same struggle we've been having as we've even attempted to come up with summary of benefits as an alternative title.
Well, in the schedule, now the schedule says support staff compensation plan, and I don't know if that's misleading as well, because that also doesn't differentiate between the agreement that we just settled and these folk. And a term might be non-negotiated. Contract agreement for non-negotiated employees. That's just a wing and a prayer. So I don't know if anybody else has any other comments. I don't know if we want to. What's your timeline restrictions on this one? This needs to be turned around by the end of the month, right?
Yeah, before the end of June, so that we have the document we lean on to issue employment agreements for the folks that are covered by this. So that's the posting in May for official action in June is kind of what we're looking for. And I've made comments on the sort of working draft on everything you said that we can take back, and most of those are pretty straightforward. The title is probably the trickiest thing.
Yeah, the title on this and the title on the schedule. And then syncing that up with where it's discussed in the pay wages paragraph. So I'd love to leave it in your hands and not have to talk about it again and let you just go forward with it. But
I think if folks are okay posting as amended with a conversation we just had, I can bring a draft to the June meeting that reflects those changes.
I think I missed something in all of Steve's wisdom, so I just need clarification. So at the top on page 1, we have some, like the support staff kind of like red lined out and the black line. But then when I look at the word, look for the word support in the document, we use support staff a lot through here. So does this cover support staff or does it not?
No, it follows the same schedule as support staff, so we use like the same new money that support staff would get goes for this. Calling it a policy, Steve, because I don't know what else to call it at the moment. Into this, goes into this thing, so I think we borrow from the support staff CBA, the agreement page, so just kind of copy paste, if you will. And that's why Steve was saying we need to scrub through for those instances where support staff is mentioned, we sort of remove that language, so it's more clear as to what this is actually covering.
Yeah, and I think Melissa's right. I mean, it's support staff is used throughout. So
all over it. I just think it can be confusing, right? If you are in support staff in the bargaining unit, but then you're mentioned here, but it doesn't cover you,
Right,
like it
exactly.
just leads to so much confusion and then potential grievances, honestly.
yeah,
I don't know that the term support staff is necessarily inaccurate, but I hear what you're saying about the confusion. Like these, I don't know that anyone covered under this agreement is required to have an educator license, for example, or an administrator license. So that term broadly, support staff, probably applies, but it is confusing, and sort of how we've differentiated that is sort of union support staff, non-union support staff.
Yeah, that, I mean,
and that maybe that's as simple as it needs to be said. And the other thing you could do maybe, Patrick, is develop, a longer term at the top of the document that is shortened into an acronym, and then just use the acronym throughout the rest of it. So if you need to be explicit about the label, but the label's too much of a mouthful, maybe a shorter acronym might work. I think non-union, if that's really applicable to everybody in this and it differentiates them, it could be as simple as that.
The only way that's somewhat confusing is that not all support staff covered by the directors, by the collective bargaining agreement are necessarily like paying members of the union. So there's that little nuance that maybe that's less confusing than the other problem we're solving by calling it non-union.
Any other comments? And we'll go to all board members who, we have a motion that to approve it, but it sounds like we want to approve as amended.
Yes.
So do we need to amend the original motion?
Yes. So I move to amend the original motion to say we approve the policy. We approve the board of directors policy. Well, actually, I guess the amendment would actually be to table it if Patrick's going to come back with a draft.
Well, it's just the way that, so, and this is where in that transition phase, if it is a policy, you have to post a policy first. It has to be posted for 10 days before you can act to adopt it. So if you don't have to post this, if I bring a draft back on June 18th, then it gets posted, then you have to wait 10 days. The chances of having that done before the end of June feels unlikely.
Right, but I'm questioning whether this is a policy. That's the tricky thing about it is it's been called a policy for so long that in essence it's a policy, even though it's not really a policy. It's a contract agreement. So it might be the very first motion to make is to act to discontinue this as a policy and make it a contract agreement.
That changes your timeline. Yeah.
And that changes the timeline. Now that all we have to do is bring back a draft and approve it at the next meeting. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
So I'm going to withdraw my earlier motion and make a new motion to discontinue the board of directors policy and rename it a contract agreement and reclassify it as a contract agreement covering non-union employees. That's my motion.
And Kathy seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? No, it's okay, the motion passes.
And then I'll make a motion to have Patrick resubmit a draft of this contract agreement at our next meeting.
Second.
With amendments as discussed.
Kathy seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Steve, can you repeat that, please?
Um, yeah, so the superintendent should revise, provide a new draft of this contract agreement with amendments as discussed at our next meeting.
Business meeting, right?
Next business
June
meeting.
18th. Yep. I'm assuming Kathy's still second,
I do.
and everyone is still in favor. Yes. All right. Next on our agenda is approving the monitoring report 4.5 board member code of conduct. May I please get a motion? Justin, a second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? We tabled this one because Brad was unavailable when it was first on the schedule. Any questions for Brad? No questions? Okay. Based upon the information provided, does the board find that the board's interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
All those in favor of approving monitoring report 4.5 board member code of conduct, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Next is an action item to approve monitoring report 4.6 board committee structure. Please get a motion.
So move.
Kristen? Second, Melissa? Any discussion? No questions?
One question. So the last recommendation about at least one member of the board sits on the committee. Didn't we agree that we were going to have at least two on all the committees at one point?
No, this is in reference to a committee that's appointed outside of board. I interpret regardless of whether board members sit on the committee to mean that a board committee need not be composed of any sitting members from the creating board. I don't know what kind of boards we have outside of this board. Is there anything that we have? I was thinking like I don't know, fundraising or a spirit committee or something if the board created some
Could be
kind
more of an ad hoc as opposed to a
Right.
standing.
Right. But if it is a standing committee, the existence of and charge of for any board committee should have at least one member on board. So are we changing this to say two?
Yeah, I'm just I'm trying to work backwards here to where this comes from up above, and I think the way that the original sentence was intended to read was just no matter what kind of a committee it is, it's only a board committee if the board approves it.
So Steve, where did they, regardless of whether board members sit on the committee, come from? That was really
Something
confusing to
tells me that probably came from the policy governance manual, you know.
It's actually
Because
language from the policy.
you can make a board committee of completely out of a board with no board members on it. It's totally possible to do that legally.
Right, but what I'm saying is, if it's a board sanctioned committee, that's why I made the recommendation at the bottom. If it's a board sanctioned committee, if it's appointed, then you should have at least one board member sitting on it.
Right, but the sentence at the beginning is a clarification of what makes a committee a board committee.
So the first sentence in the bullet of the policy, 4.6 board committee structure says a committee is a board committee only if its existence and charge come from the board, regardless of whether board members sit on the committee. So that's probably where that language came.
Like here's an example, and I don't know.
But why?
I don't know, I just Googled it just for funsies, and it's like listed on a bunch of other school boards, like in their docs. I'm not saying we need to leave it, I'm just saying it sounds like it was probably standard, but something like that.
Well, what would happen if we just said a committee is a board committee only if its existence and charge come from the board, period?
Yeah, that could clear it up. I'm just thinking, Patrick, about the bond committee that worked on the bond. I don't remember whether or not there were board members on that committee or not.
You had board
There
members
were,
on the bond.
I don't remember how many, but at least one for sure,
Yeah.
maybe two or
Okay,
more.
all right, but there didn't necessarily have to be.
So then how do you ensure that the committee is acting in the best interest of the district?
Well, you still
That's
have to
sort of our
prove
role.
you still have to prove the charge, and the charge can say, you know, the board meetings have to be public. They have to follow Robert's rules. They have to have minutes. They have to report back to the board. There's really nothing that changes really, other than who's sitting on the board and who's not. But I'd be fine if you wanted to just take off everything after the comma, because I think that's really all the sentence is meant to imply.
Well, I'm fine with that too.
I think in the charges that we wrote for each of the committees, we designated how many board members we wanted to have on each one of them. I don't know if,
Yes.
Right.
so I don't want
right.
to conflict with that,
That's for committees within the board. I'm thinking of extraneous committees.
Well, these are all board committees, whether they're within the board or if there's an extraneous committee outside of the board doesn't have anything to do with it.
It wouldn't be sanctioned by the board, you're right.
So what's the?
So I would agree just taking everything off after the comma.
Right, so it would read, a committee is a board committee only if its existence and charge come from the board, period.
Right.
And then just
Right.
disregard, regardless
rest
of
of
whether
that.
board members sit on the committee.
Yeah,
So that would be a change of the policy though.
that's right. This is a recommendation at the end of this monitoring report. So I guess the question is, do we want to just modify the recommendation? And then it would go to the policy and governance committee to actually make the change and bring that to the board. Does that make sense?
I mean, eliminating the second half of the sentence after the comma does make it more concise, but does it change the meaning? Am I missing something?
Well, I think policy governance, if you read the manual, they also note that you can have a board committee that doesn't have any board members on it. There's nothing that says you have to have board members on a board committee. You just have to charge those people
by the board.
with whatever the board wants them to do. And in the end, the board is responsible for whatever they're doing.
That's not what it says.
That's what it says now, yeah. I mean, it does give the board more flexibility.
Yeah,
but also the
then-
opportunity to shoot ourselves in the foot.
And then we can assign the charge.
Well, the interpretation does specifically interpret that regardless, and it says exactly what I just said. I interpret regardless of whether the board members sit on the committee to mean that a board committee need not be composed of any sitting members from the creating board. I think that's directly from policy governance. I think it's may even be directly out of Vermont state law. That I'm not clear about.
So do we want to go through the official Board of Education response, and then if there's a recommendation to change it, we'll add it to that?
I guess I'm sort of maybe changing my mind, because if we're going to remove the thing at the top, we need to remove it from the interpretation as well. And it does provide more flexibility if the board happens to need that tool down the road. If the board wanted to create a committee that was maybe considered to be impartial on a topic, didn't involve the administration, didn't involve the board, and was doing third-party monitoring, we might want the flexibility to create a committee that didn't have anybody on the board on it.
Well, from a practical standpoint, I mean, I've been sort of working with various boards for 7 or 8 years, and we've never even considered doing that. So the policy's been working.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, or I'll just run down these questions?
So I can easily remove my recommendation. If you want to just leave it as is, if the board feels that it's.
I don't think it's going to hurt anything to leave it as is. And I think in terms of our committee structures, we've been designating how many board members we want on our committees at a minimum, and we have to approve those charges as a full board. So I think we kind of set that expectation as we're going along. So I don't think this says we're going to make committees out of non-board members. I think it just says we have the ability to do that if we want to.
Okay. So based upon the information provided, does the board find that the board's interpretation is reasonable? Yes or no?
Yes.
Does the data demonstrate accomplishment of this interpretation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments you want captured?
I would just amend the motion to say that we approve the report as amended by removing the recommendation. You'll have to vote on the amendment.
Okay.
Somebody else would have to second the amendment.
Second. Kylie seconds. So Steve, you amended your original motion? Or you're making a second? You're making,
I'm not sure that I actually made the original motion.
you made the original motion. Kristen, do you want to retract your original motion?
Yes.
No,
Okay.
we're amending it. So
Oh,
you vote
you
on,
amend the
you-
original.
so you vote on the amendment. People can vote it up or down.
Okay, so,
Can we state the amendment, please?
So the,
to approve the monitoring
to-
report 4.6 as amended by removing
Right.
recommendation. And Kristen, you were comfortable making that motion?
Yes.
Okay. And then the second was Melissa?
Yeah, sure.
You
That
feel
sounds
comfortable?
good. Yep.
Okay. And then all those in favor of approving the monitoring report 4.6 as amended?
no, so,
Be back to the amendment, yeah. So
Oh,
Steve,
so
I
so
think
actually, I made the amendment. All right, so I'm the author of the amendment. I think Kathy seconded it.
Seconded,
okay.
yep.
Yeah. So that,
so the
now
motion on the
now
floor
all
is
you have to,
approve the amendment, or not.
all you have to do is vote on the amendment.
I thought you just did that.
That's what I, yeah, all those in
No.
favor of approving just the amendment,
Correct.
removing the recommendation, please say aye. Any opposed?
All right. Now you actually have to go back
How we go
and
through,
and improve
approve the monitoring report 4.6 as amended.
by removing the recommendation.
Just leave it as amended.
I know it sounds funny, but
We did an
that's the
amendment
process.
motion, which was what we just did.
So the language you gave me for the amendment was to approve monitoring report 4.6 board committee structure as amended by removing the recommended language.
Yep.
And now
That was
that's
for
same
the,
thing.
that was for the amendment.
Right.
Yeah.
The amendment and the final motion are going to be the same in the end.
Fine. All those in favor of approving and, yeah, all those in favor of approving the monitoring report as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving on, so we had taken out action items D and E, and I'd like to put in here for action item D, or yeah, D now would be to amend the public comment section for the 4/30/24 board meeting minutes. And that public comment was approved by the member who made it. And the new public comment that is going to be captured in the minutes is, I'll send it in an email too, is the expectation for the district and the board that we as a community make the best choices as an educational institution to keep education as a top priority, and it feels like we have lost that. Some of the items from the public record requests bring up pains from denial of services, but then families see money spent on big ticket items. Parents are worried about retaliation for speaking up, but feel devalued by the lack of attention to services that their students are legally entitled to. She wants education to remain the top priority and for the district to make choices based on needs versus wants. So this comment would go in where the comment is now to replace that. So I would need an action item to make that amendment to the 4/30/24 public comment section.
What do I have to say? Okay. Second.
So Melissa first, Kylie second. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of amending the public comment section in 4/30/24 agenda minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed? No. And then we jump down to action item, which would now be E, but it's F on here, is to authorize the chair and the superintendent to accept the IDEA-B grant funds.
Is that like a standard operating procedure? You just need?
Yeah.
So moved.
Kathy,
Well, second.
Barb. Any discussion? All those in favor of authorizing the chair and the superintendent to accept the IDEAB grant funds, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And I'm gonna say Kylie's abstaining because she left the room. Then last on our agenda for the board management and governance section is a discussion on identifying topics, date and location for summer board retreat. And so in the past, we've covered a whole range of topics, some tailored to what the board's interested in learning more about, which would be sort of a continuation of our board trainings. We've also done big discussions about ends policy. We've done discussions about, I don't know, Steve and Brad fill in, you've been to more than I have. But in the last two, those are sort of the big ones that we discussed. So if there's topics that we feel are important to make sure we're covering in our board retreat, now's a good time to bring those up. Also, if your brain is mushy now and you have ideas later, feel free to email them because we'll start putting that together.
I think you came out, one of our very first board meetings this year, you came out with a list of things that people had wanted to know more about.
Yep, I still have that available.
That might be a good framework to start from.
Okay.
I think a big spread that government's the best model moving forward. Is it something we keep, or is there a different option that seems more appropriate?
You know,
So
when
Aaron,
Yeah, Steve.
I think actually Liz had her hand up first.
Liz?
One of the things for us all to consider, maybe because we could put it out and then have people vote on priorities like we did with the questions for administration. Following up on one of, I think originating from Kathy about a breakdown of all of the people in every school, yes, and paired with the facility needs of, I mean, so maybe you don't have this, right? And that's okay. But what we do have or what would need to be done in order to bring each of our facilities up to current state standards. Does that make sense? Basically, so what I'm trying to get at is that there's the group that I believe is going to happen, the facilities or construction aid group in the legislature, and they have their list of things that they are considering as to whether, I believe, as to whether or not to support school construction, which we certainly could use the support as we see what we're doing with our construction budget currently. So I wonder if we could kind of have a mirror of their list of priorities and what they would be looking at from us in order to possibly support us with construction. If we could start to gather that information, and maybe that can't happen at this summer, but at some point in time, I would like to see where we, well, just compiling that information in the first place so that we would be ready to give it to them. And just knowing those things for ourselves. Does that make sense?
Well, to Liz's point, Patrick, don't you have Truex working on some kind of a facilities?
Yeah, and I think we'll have something by the retreat time so that we could have something pretty comprehensive and meaty to review if that was a topic that was identified.
And then the second thing was the state has new board governance standards, and there's a self-assessment tool that the VSBA has put out for us to check our compliance with those new standards. So I think we want to go over those standards and go over that self-assessment tool. And I think it would be a wise practice to actually make that a standard part of the board retreat every year, is to run that self-assessment tool. we've just sort of popped it open in the PGC committee at the end of last year and didn't really dive into it at all. But it might be worth a dive at the board retreat.
Brad and then Justin.
When I think about retreats, I don't think about them as extended business meetings. So I think as we put the agenda together, if we could stay away from, I mean, my view, stay away from using board retreat time to do things that we haven't had time to do in regular board meetings. I think it's pretty clear over the last few months that we're kind of at an inflection point, you know, with the district and how we approach things. And I'm not competent to lead anything like this, but might be somebody out there to engage in some sort of a visioning sort of exercise where we could sort of, you know, figure out, not necessarily come up with a, you know, with a solution to all of our all the problems, whether it's, you know, public trust or whether it's, you know, built, you know, facilities or whether it's, you know, the budget. But rather to figure out how we as a collective, as a board, can think outside the box a little bit. And not necessarily constrain ourselves to the structures imposed on us all the time, either by, you know, public opinion or the Vermont Education Agency or the Vermont School Board Association. So I'd advocate for something like that, a little bit more freeform and something a little bit more fun and creative, and maybe, you know, tapping into our collective imagination. Creative imagination.
Justin?
Yeah, I mean, to bounce off Brad and Liz's points, I have the Levinson report pulled up and 82 documents. I know Patrick last summer during the facilities committee meetings, I mean, we dove a little bit into that maybe, but it would be nice. Is there a way to condense 82 pages so that all the new board members are able to kind of hit the high points or to review certain aspects of it? I know something that's been brought up is like low enrollment, you know, do we merge the 6th graders into the middle school? And so we got feedback from our community night that we have the Levinson report, the new budget's going to come up this summer. We're going to like look into this and take recommendations. And being a new board member, I haven't really dove into this, so I don't know if there's a way to around that.
Any other thoughts? Topics? And I can certainly send out the other list I had generated too. We can sort of rate them like we did and see what flushes out of that. And if anything comes up between now and August, or well, a couple weeks into August, because we'll create our agenda in advance, but just feel free to email me as always. Yeah, Kathy.
Do we have dates?
That's the next.
That was the
one. Yep.
next.
Yep, we gotta get to that. So usually we hold them in August. And we the past few years have held them at the Moncton town offices because they have a great view and all the amenities we could need, including stable internet. So that's been a great space for us in the past couple of years, but so usually in August. I don't know what your calendars all look like.
The week of the 12th, I think, would be typically the week we'd have. Week before that's field days, which is probably tricky. And then the week after the week of the 12th is when staff start coming back. So
I'm just acknowledging that ELP is not open for their summer camp in August, nor are the schools. So I do not have childcare in those first 2 weeks. And my child, who I'm trying to put to bed right now, would be delighted to join us, but would be a little chaos monkey. So I'm just acknowledging this may be really tricky unless there's like a magic childcare solution.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that, but hopefully between now and August, we could come up with something creative to help you be able to attend.
I'll add that the week, of the 19th is not gonna work for me. I'm gonna be moving a child into college, so I'm not gonna be in town.
Usually we hold them during a working day is
Yeah.
what we've
so
done,
it's the
so.
21st, which is
Yeah.
Wednesday through that Friday.
Yeah.
Are we tied to August? Could it be like the second week in September?
I don't know why the history of August. Actually.
I'd support that.
Well, does that run afoul of our business schedule?
Don't think we have our dates put in yet for past July for board meetings.
And we have ever had sort of retreat and then immediately following a business meeting to do whatever business had to get completed in that month.
I have a wild idea, and then I do have to hop off for bedtime. But my wild idea is, what if we paired it with the VSA, VSBA, Lake Morley retreat that they have going on for the annual board training? And that's asking a lot for people to take time off from work, but it's a really beautiful place and everybody's up there doing retreats anyway. So feel free to say no. It was just a wild idea.
When is that?
It's sometime in the fall when the leaves are still on the trees. That's what I remember. But I bet, Patrick, you know when it is, because I bet you went.
October 14th or something like that.
October 24, 25 is the VSA, VSBA fall conference.
Want to refrain from doing the retreat and then a business meeting right after.
I can't do 2 days off of work. Really, I can only do that.
So so people are feeling like maybe not August, but the first week of September.
The second week?
The second week of
September.
I think our committee meetings might be the 10th thereabouts, and then our business meeting, if we're following the same schedule, would then be the 24th of that month. So would we like to do it so that we're having committee meetings and then also a full day retreat, or in that second week of September?
Worry about conflating two different things. I get the practicalities, but if the purpose is to have a meaningful retreat and, you know, not be constrained by, business. But
I guess I wasn't suggesting pairing them, more do we want to have days of multiple meetings? Sorry.
Like schedule us on the same day.
No, saying
In the
like,
same
do
week.
you want it in the same week?
Okay.
no, that's fine.
Yeah. Are other people feeling like that's something they could commit to, is having a committee meeting one day and then perhaps a retreat another day?
Yes.
Liz?
I guess I just feel a little anxious about continuing to move forward with community engagement and continuing, especially the visioning. I think it's great having information. I struggle to want to put it off a month. And I know Danielle's left, but it could be like whoever's watching my kid maybe could also watch her kid, like, but could we put out, I don't know. So I mean,
Well, we
in a
could-
way, a lot of our community was saying, like, are we going to keep doing these? Is it going to be monthly? I don't know if we were maybe thinking about organizing anything not official, but just community engagement over the summer. I mean, I would push the board retreat earlier. I'd do it sooner in the summer. But I mean, I know June is rough, but early July, just so that we could, I don't know. It's fine. I'll do September, but if we had to move in a direction, I would go earlier rather than later.
I feel like it's really hard to schedule I feel like we're scheduling this too late, because I don't know about everybody here, but my summer is like scheduled. So it's hard, I'm, could potentially be gone a lot of these days in July especially.
Last year I had to fly back from vacation to go.
And then if I'm gonna take a day off work, I've already taken a bunch of days off for food that's booked. I mean, I'm not saying they won't work, I'm just saying there's a high likelihood, and what's the chances that we're all gonna find one?
Well, what if I take a few weeks in August and a few weeks in September, and I put out potentials? And then everyone can vote, we'll see where it lands, and if we need another discussion about it, we will.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Okay. Last is public,
Okay with Moncton, should we just pin that down? Like,
oh, yeah,
Yeah, that was a great spot.
Moncton is a good.
we've tried several, that's the best.
Yeah,
3 miles.
I think the only suggestion I would have. A copy of it.
Oh, yeah.
I really needed that last year.
Yeah.
The 3 o'clock bewitching hour.
Okay. So I'll put out dates for August and September. We'll vote on those. We said yes, we'll use the Moncton town office. And then coffee. You're welcome. All right. We good with that discussion? Okay. So we'll move to public comment. Any comment at this time? Yeah.
Hi, Sean again. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of the hard questions you guys were asking tonight. And really not just hard questions, but insisting on full, complete answers. I think that is the most important. If you look back over the years of board minutes, it's a pattern of continuing to ask questions, but never having the resolution. One question was in 2021, I noticed was, would the numbers of ones and twos, so like the doesn't meet expectations, if those numbers would change the answer of compliance versus non-compliance? I feel like that's something that could be done in the future. It was said that it would be thought about at the time, but there was nothing done from there. But the same with goes to policy changes and language changes is every year. And I've actually sent an email to everyone with screenshots of these from the policies over the years from 2017 to now that have said, we want policy language changes, should we or not? Should we discuss policy language changes for treatment of staff and students? Should we discuss this? And nothing since 2017. So I'd say this is something that really needs to be followed up on and not just forgotten again for another year. I'm not clear what happens with, I know we said that the monitoring report, it's okay to accept it and that it can be brought up later. I've personally never really seen that in any of the minutes. I've never seen that that's ever happened. So I'd be curious to see if that can happen in the future. But my understanding is that monitoring reports are used later on as a way to monitor the performance of the superintendent. So all these accepted monitoring reports are all seen as good versus, hey, let's talk about this. So to me, it is important to accept or reject a monitoring report because that can be brought up later. Just like objecting to anything, if you don't object, then you have no reason to object later. You have to make it known now. And that's why I did that. So I appreciate that you guys did at least reject the staff one, but I would urge you to take a closer look at some of the other ones before accepting in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah?
Hi, I just had a quick response. One board member had wondered if it would be helpful to redo the survey, and I just wanted to say yes, I think that would absolutely be helpful to have it reissued. Possibly the easiest thing to do this year would be to reissue the survey with the very same questions, but one, get it out to all staff. And I do work pretty closely with Patrick in my current role as a union co-president, so, but I'm just one person. So do reissue the survey. But I wonder, with the same questions, I mean, but I wonder if perhaps the board itself could reissue the survey with the same questions. I would feel much more comfortable. I think a lot of people would feel way more comfortable if the results were going to a third party. Because there is legitimate fear of retaliation. Thanks, everybody.
Kelly from Bristol. So one thing that I just wanted to bring up was there was some discussion, and I may have misunderstood it, but there was some discussion about possibly doing a survey for parents. I believe that was initially brought up by Daniela for the first monitoring report. Kind of in the same vein that we spent quite a bit of time talking about it for valid reasons, to provide evidence for how the teachers are treated. We should be doing the same with parents and students when it's been brought up over and over and over and over again to you guys. So I just want you guys to value our children the same way you do our teachers when we have these discussions. So I would urge that before we move forward, you guys further look into that. Thanks.
Thank you. Kelly, did your school, your individual school, do any kind of a survey this year? A school climate survey?
The MAUSD school that my child was part of? No. My child had a very brief survey that he reported to me that he did at school. Though, now that you mention it, asking, I think it was like, if they felt safe with anybody there, as well as some questions about substances. And my child reported to me that no kids felt comfortable, giving a honest answer on that. So I think that the way in which that survey was given to our children, first, should be told to the parents so we can have at-home discussions on the importance around it, as well as giving it to the children in a way that they feel comfortable answering,
But no survey was given to parents.
I have not received. Have you?
Bristol said one just about the handbook. I did reply back to Aaron Boynton though, because there was at the top, it said link to the handbook and the link didn't work. So I replied back and said, can you please make sure the link to the handbook in the survey actually works so that I can look at the handbook as you're asking me to survey it, just to see how we felt about the parenting book. But that's the only survey. No.
Around.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay. June meeting preparation is underway. Just following the board work plan and with the additional June 3rd budget meeting presentation, and then June 11th revote for the budget.
We don't have anything on the fifth, right?
Nothing on the 5th.
I think I just messed up.
Oh, we'll see them.
So I lost them both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And delete one thing.
Is there someone who, forgetting who is responsible for highlights? Barb, Barb Crandall. Are you in the agenda?
I didn't take notes.
Are you in the agenda at all?
Probably.
We just need the board self-evaluation because it's our business meeting.
So Aaron, this piece that you sent out was just a
draft.
A draft. Okay, and just give you feedback. Okay.
Okay. What is the level of engagement of all board members? Hi. Was the agenda followed? Any comments?
Great job. Share.
Okay.
Okay. Does the chair effectively establish the agenda and materials for distribution to the board?
Yes.
Comments? Is the chair effective in fostering a professional culture regarding fair and open deliberation, full participation of all members, and ensuring the integrity of the board process?
Yeah.
Yes. Comments? Other feedback for the chair?
Thank you.
And just submit it at the bottom.
Yeah. And anything that went well? That you want to mention?
High level of participation.
What suggestions do you have for ways of improving future meetings? Anything? I'm gonna say.
Said air conditioner.
No, I would say it out loud.
Yeah.
Landscape, so the heat.
I know. Real boring sleeping.
Yes, I'm putting that in. Okay.
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So-
Second.
Sorry, I was so slow.
All those in favor of adjourning at 9:07, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?